What's up, everybody? Today I want to talk about pruning your tomato plants, and it's kind of more of an art than a science. There is some kind of general rule of thumbs that you want to follow, but there's a lot of kind of just feel to it. So I wanted to show you what I've done with mine this year, and it's worked out amazing. These are probably the best tomatoes I've ever had, and I wanted to kind of explain what I have done. So just some vocabulary to start with. You've got your main stem. Show you on this plant right here. This is a super sweet 100 cherry tomato. So you've got your main stem, and then if I can find one, let's see. All right, here we go. So at the intersection between the main stem, which is this, and a branch, you'll have this growth that comes out, and this one is way overgrown. You want to get to these sooner than I have. It's been a couple weeks since I pruned mine, but this is a sucker, and we'll start off as just a little tiny shoot. Let me see if I can find a smaller one. Oh, right here. There's a good example. This is what they'll look like when they first come out. So here's the main stem, that's the branch, and at that 45-degree intersection, that's a sucker that will come out. So these suckers will produce and continue to produce. Here's a good example of a sucker from a sucker right here. So this is a sucker. A lot of times they'll start at the base of the plant again. So a tomato plant just wants to be propagating all the time. So this is a sucker that came out. And then right here is the stem of the sucker, and this is the branch, and there's another sucker that came out here. So very quickly your tomato plants can become completely unruly. This is indeterminate variety tomatoes. Determinate varieties you don't want to prune. We'll talk about that in another video, but indeterminate tomato plants can get very unwieldy very quickly. So what I have done this year is I have allowed the main stem to grow and one sucker. So here's the intersection of that sucker. I don't even know which one is the sucker anymore, but this one may be the main stem, this one may be the main stem, but the other one is the sucker, and then I've allowed those two to grow, and I've pruned off all of the rest of the suckers except for the last couple of weeks. So here's another one that's starting from the base of the plant. That's a sucker that I'll need to prune off, or it'll grow into another tomato plant which will produce more suckers, and it gets to be unwieldy. So what I decided to do is leave two leaders this year. They're called leaders. If you leave a sucker, it turns into a leader, and prune off all the rest of them. And they have gone gangbusters. And some of these vines have gone over the top of this canopy. They're probably, some of them are 14 feet long, I would guess. And like I said, it's been a couple weeks since I've done this, but I need to get through and prune off the suckers again. A couple things happens when you do that. Number one, it increases the amount of airflow that can circulate in your leaves. And one of the biggest problems with tomatoes is blight, and that blight loves humid conditions. So if you can eliminate some of the foliage that's overlapping on top of each other, then there'll be more airflow and you'll have less problems with blight. The other thing is that the quality of the tomatoes goes up when there's more energy being put into the tomatoes than there is into supporting these hundreds of clones that happen, hundreds of suckers or clones of the plant that happen on the plant. So these cherry tomatoes are just enormous, some of them. They're just a higher quality tomato. So, like I said, here's another sucker that should have been taken off, and I just take a knife on one this size. I'll just take a knife and cut it right there at the stem. If they're smaller, like this one over here I showed you, you can just snap them off. And that's what I've done with suckers this year. Like I said, it's more of an art than a science. You may want to have 3 or 4 leaders if you've got the space. You might want to just do a single stem. If you want to pack the tomato plants more tightly in there and have lots of different varieties, that's a strategy to do that. You could just do a single stem, cut off all the suckers, and just have the one set stem that grows. If you don't want to maintain them, you can just let them go wild. Like I said, you might run into some more problems with blight that way, but it'll still produce tomatoes, and that's a strategy too. So like I said, it's a matter of preference and strategy. That's everything to do with suckers. Now, as far as pruning anything else, so you can see like this leaf right here is starting to get a few spots on it. These are fungal spots. It'll be some kind of blight, and it's not too bad. It's not gonna hurt anything if I leave those on there. But if that spreads and gets, I don't know if there's an example here, like this one maybe. This leaf right here is starting to get more and more spots on it. So if you can get rid of the leaves that have those spots on it, it's going to slow the progression of blight. Eventually, blight is going to overtake almost any plant. We live in a very dry climate here, and we don't have as big of a problem with blight as a lot of places where it's humid, but eventually blight's going to get to the plant. So if you can keep up with trimming the leaves that have blight off the tomatoes, you're going to be able to prolong the life of that tomato plant. You kind of have to have a balance there too, because you don't want to trim off all the foliage, because then the plant won't be able to photosynthesize, and you know, you're not going to get any tomatoes if it can't photosynthesize. So kind of the general rule of thumb is you want to have at least 50% of the foliage. So, you know, this plant right here is probably 10 to 12 feet tall. I could probably take all the foliage from about here and take it off. So you want to have at least 50%. I like to stay at about 30% of the foliage that I take off. But these leaves aren't doing much good for the plant anyway. They're old and tired. All of the photosynthesis coming from up above the plant. So I will go through, and I could probably take another foot of these leaves off just because they've kind of served their purpose, and all of the action is happening at the top of the plant. So I will do that as well, and that's kind of my art slash rule of thumb slash semi-science about pruning tomato plants. Take the bottom leaves off, especially if there's any touching the ground. You'll notice that there's none of the leaves, except for this sucker that I haven't got to yet. None of the leaves are touching the ground. If anything is touching the ground, make sure to take that off. Any plants that start to get spots or blight, or any foliage leaves that start to get spots or blight, you can take that off up to 50% of the foliage on the plant. The suckers, like I said, this has been the best tomato year I've had when I left 2 liters. Some people will leave more, but that's kind of the art slash science of pruning your tomatoes, and hopefully that helps you out and gives you some ideas. Ultimately, it's going to come down to experimentation and what works best for you and your climate and your weather and the type of tomatoes you're growing, etc., etc. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope that helps, and let me know if you have any questions. So I wanted to just show you one other thing about suckers. So usually, like I explained previously, they grow at the intersection between a branch and the main stem. But sometimes, well, in fact, not sometimes, a lot of the times, they will start at the end of a truss. This is called a truss, is where the tomatoes hang. So this truss is almost empty. It's got a few left. So at the end of this truss, this tomato plant shot out another sucker, and it grew right from the truss. It didn't grow from the intersection. So here's a sucker that's growing from the intersection. This one's coming from the truss. And I should have got to this previous, but now that there's tomatoes on it, I'm probably going to cut it off right here after the tomatoes so that those can grow. Get rid of that. This is another sucker off of the sucker. Get rid of that. And then, like I said, I'm going to go through, get rid of some of these leaves that are on the lower. That truss I'll probably get rid of. That's not doing any good. They got many tomatoes on it. Here's another one of those suckers that's coming off the end of a truss. Get rid of that. And some of these you can leave if you want to. It's just kind of up to you. It's another one that's coming off the end of a truss. Oh, got tomatoes all the way down there, so I'll probably cut it right here. Get rid of that. This one I'm going to get rid of altogether. ripe tomato I haven't got to yet. There's another sucker. It's got some tomatoes on it, so I'll cut it there. See, and this also at the end of a truss, so. And some of these down here. So when these were smaller plants, I was, like I said, it's been about 3 weeks since I've pruned these, and when they were smaller, I was really diligent. It was at least once a week, and maybe every 3 days or so, I'd come out and pull up all the suckers because I wanted really all the energy going into the stems and the tomatoes that were on the stems that I kept, and you know that seems to have paid off. Some of these tomato stems are incredible, some over an inch in diameter, but now that they're big and healthy and tall, and it's, you know, well into the gardening season, I've become more lax about it, and I don't know, maybe it's not as important now that they're producing like they are, but yeah, like I said, it's an art and it's an experimentation, and you know, any ideas that you have, I would love to hear about them. I'd like to try new things. And last year I did just a single stem, which worked well also, but I felt like I had enough room to still have airflow to have 2 stems, and I don't know, maybe next year I'll even try 3. We'll see what happens. It's all about experimentation. So if you have any tips or any tricks that you like and that work well for you, let me know, and happy gardening.